He didn't know the boy's name, only the sound of a scream tearing through the storm, the kind that ripped marrow from bone and froze the night itself. Jack Turner. Single dad, grease-stained hands bills stacked like barricades didn't pause to think. His daughter's voice was still in his ear when he broke across the street toward the fire, the orange glow clawing at the dark. A moment like this does not knock politely. It rips the door off its hinges. One act of courage can set your entire life ablaze, and sometimes the smoke clears to reveal a family you never imagined. Follow my story to the end and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I know how far this story has traveled. The night broke open with fire. Jack Turner, 38 years old, a man whose palms carried more grease than hope, was trudging down the muddy road beside his daughter Lily when the scream cut through the storm. It wasn't just noise. It was the kind of sound that pierced the marrow, the kind you don't mistake for anything else. A child's scream. Jack froze mid-step, rain slashing sideways across his face. South Glen was drowning in another storm, its sagging rooftops leaking like old lungs, the air carrying the bitter tang of motor oil and rust. Lily tugged at his sleeve, eyes wide, but Jack was already moving. Across the street, a worn-out trailer pulsed with orange light. Flames licked the walls, smoke curling upward like claws tearing at the night sky. The storm tried to fight it, rain spitting hard, but fire laughed at rain. Dad Lily started. "Stay back." Jack shoved her behind him, his chest hammering. He sprinted across the mud boots, sinking deep, heart racing faster than his legs. The front door wouldn't budge. Locked. No time. Jack ripped a tire iron from the bed of an abandoned truck and swung with everything in him. Glass shattered shards slicing his forearm. Pain tore up his arm, hot wet. He didn't stop. He hauled himself inside. The heat smothered him instantly. Smoke clawed at his throat, filled his lungs, until he dropped low to the floor, coughing hard, eyes burning. "Hello." His voice cracked. "Where are you?" At first nothing. Then a cough. Small. Weak. Jack scrambled toward it, heart hammering like a war drum. His hand brushed something tiny and trembling in the corner. A boy, 5, maybe 6, curled up with a bandana tied clumsily around his wrist. "I got you, buddy," Jack rasped, scooping him into his arms. "Hold on!" The ceiling groaned above them, wood popping like gunfire. Jack ripped off his flannel shirt, wrapped it around the child, and crawled back toward the window. He shoved kicked lungs burning, and then the world collapsed. When Jack opened his eyes, everything was gray. For a heartbeat, he thought he was dead. Then pain shot through his ribs like fire all over again. "He's breathing. He's alive," voices shouted. Hands pulled him, lifted him, paramedics. Strong arms dragged him from wreckage as rain poured harder, mixing blood with ash. The boy lay cradled in his chest, limp but breathing. Soot streaked his small face like war paint. Dad. Through blurred vision, Jack saw Lily sprinting toward him, sobbing, her hands trembling as they touched his burned shirt. Before he could answer, the ground rumbled. Not thunder. Engines. Harleys. 1, then 5, then a dozen roaring down the street like a tidal wave of chrome and fury. Black leather. Heavy boots. Faces hard with ink and storm. The EMTs froze. A firefighter muttered under his breath. "Hell." The lead biker ripped off his helmet, tossed it aside, and sprinted toward the ambulance. His vest read, "Hell's Angels, AFFA." But it was the way he dropped to his knees beside the boy that froze everyone. "That's my son," he whispered, his voice cracking in half. His hand shook as he reached. "That's River. Please tell me he's alive." Jack struggled up on the stretcher chest on fire vision swimming. "He's breathing," he croaked. "But he needs oxygen now." The biker's eyes shot to Jack's, locking like steel against steel. In that silence drenched in rain, smeared in ash, something unspoken forged itself between them. Not gratitude, not yet. Understanding. The kind that only comes when fire tests 2 men at once. Hours later, Jack lay on a gurney in the ER, bruised, bandaged stitches holding his arm together. Lily sat by his side, clutching a paper cup of coffee far too big for her hands. "You saved him, Dad," she whispered, her voice small but steady. "Doesn't matter what anyone else says. You saved him." Jack's throat worked, but words failed, because he knew what waited outside reporters' questions, cameras. They wanted a hero. But Jack didn't feel like one. Heroes didn't mop bus station floors at night to keep the lights on. Heroes didn't dodge eviction notices stacked taller than their paychecks. He was no hero. He was just a man who ran into fire because he couldn't do anything else. But somewhere beyond the ER doors, engines still idled. The angels were waiting, and Jack Turner's life, whether he wanted it or not, had just changed forever. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and old coffee, a mix that clung to Jack Turner's skin long after the adrenaline drained from his veins. He sat propped up in a stiff bed gauze wrapped tight around his forearm ribs, aching with every breath. Machines beeped steadily, though the nurse had told him a dozen times he wasn't in danger anymore. But Jack didn't feel safe. He felt exposed. The curtain around his bed shuddered as Lily slipped inside carrying a styrofoam cup of coffee she could barely hold steady. Her hair was damp, her shoes squeaked with each step, but her eyes wide, worried never left him. "Drink this," she murmured, setting the cup on the tray. Jack managed to smile, though it tugged at the cuts on his face. "You make a good nurse." She sat beside him, folding her arms. "You make a lousy patient." They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that breaks tension but doesn't erase it. The door banged open. A nurse wheeled in a TV stand, its cord trailing like a leash. "They're running the story again," she said softly. "Do you want it off?" Jack frowned. "What story?" The nurse hesitated. Then the screen lit up. Grainy cell phone footage played a blurry figure smashing a window, flames curling, smoke billowing. Then the same figure, Jack, emerging, cradling a child in his arms as fire raged behind him. Voices shouted, a girl screamed, and then the clip ended with sirens howling. A reporter's voice filled the room. Local mechanic Jack Turner hailed tonight as the hero of South Glen saved 6-year-old River Malone, son of local motorcycle club leader Hawk Malone. Turner's courage has gone viral, with the video shared across 6 news channels in the past hour. The screen froze on Jack's ash-streaked face. Hero Lily whispered almost to herself. Jack turned away, his jaw tightening. Heroes don't miss rent. Heroes don't get pink slips for being late to shifts. Heroes run into fire, she shot back. He didn't answer, because she was right, and it scared him. That night, as rain tapped against the hospital windows, the door opened again. This time, it wasn't a nurse. It was him, the man from the fire. Hawk Malone stepped inside, flanked by 2 bikers who lingered near the doorway. His presence filled the small room before he said a word. Leather cut draped over broad shoulders, silver chain glinting at his throat, eyes sharp, but weighed down with exhaustion. He removed his sunglasses, folding them slowly. Then he stepped closer. "My name's Hawk," he said, voice gravel low. "River's my son." Jack nodded, throat dry. "He'll be okay. Doctor said oxygen and rest." Hawk's jaw worked. He looked away as if blinking back something dangerous. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out something wrapped in cloth. Jack expected money, payment, something transactional, but when Hawk unfolded the fabric, it wasn't cash. It was a silver pin. Simple, small, shaped like an angel wing, letters etched beneath AFFA. Hawk placed it on the table beside Jack's bed. "You don't know us," Hawk murmured, "but know this: when someone saves one of ours, they don't stand alone anymore." Jack stared at the pin, confusion mixing with disbelief. "I don't follow." "You will." Hawk's gaze burned through him. "Not today, not tomorrow, but you will." Without another word, Hawk turned his men, falling in step behind him. The door shut softly. Silence pressed in. Lily picked up the pin, running her thumb across the etched letters. "What does it mean?" Jack shook his head. His chest ached, not just from bruised ribs. "I don't know." But deep down, something shifted, something small but undeniable. Because in that moment, for the first time in years, Jack Turner didn't feel entirely alone. Morning broke thin and colorless like the hospital sheets Jack Turner had just escaped. South Glen wore a hangover of rain, puddles filmed with rainbow slicks of oil, sky the color of old steel. Jack moved slower than usual, each step a reminder: bruised ribs, tight stitches, the ache that stayed once the adrenaline left. He didn't go home first. He walked straight to the garage. The bell over the office door gave its sad little ding. The place smelled like brake dust and stale coffee. Hank the owner looked up from a clipboard pen frozen in his hand. His eyes skated past the bandage on Jack's arm, the purple haloing his cheekbone. They landed on the news van idling across the street. Jack Hank said, "Not warm, not cold, just tired." Jack tried a smile that didn't stick. "I can work light duty, front desk, orders, whatever keeps the lights." Hank winced. It's not that simple. Jack knew the tune. He'd heard it before a dozen times in a dozen offices. Still, he made himself listen. "You've got reporters sniffing around," Hank said. "Phones ringing off the hook with people asking about the hero mechanic. Customers don't want cameras in their faces. My insurance guy called. He used the word liability 3 times. Jack stared. "You're firing me because I saved a kid from a fire." Hank sighed, eyes softening for 1 second. "I'm sorry." He slid an envelope across the counter. It felt too light. Everything did. Jack didn't argue. Couldn't. He tucked the envelope into his jacket, nodded once, and walked back out into the gray morning. On the curb, the news van door opened a crack. A woman with perfect hair lifted a mic. "Mr. Turner, can we?" Jack kept walking. Home. Their 2-room apartment had that end-of-month quiet that made refrigerators sound louder than they should. Unpaid bills fanned out on the table like a losing hand of cards. The silver pin angel wing 3 letters sat where Lily had left it, catching a shard of weak light through the blinds. Lily looked up from her homework, searching his face. She didn't ask. She already knew. He tried and failed to make it a joke. Turns out heroism makes you bad for business. Lily's mouth hardened the way it did when she wanted to swear, but wouldn't not in front of him. "We'll be okay," she said. He wanted to say yes, of course, absolutely. Instead, he rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand and sat thumb worrying a crease in the table's laminate. They counted money that night like they always did before the month flipped. Quarters, crumpled bills, diner tips Lily had rescued from apron pockets. Rent circled in red on the calendar. The day after that, electric. "I can pick up extra shifts," she offered. "You can pass algebra," he countered softer than a scold. More prayer than joke. When she went to bed, Jack stood in the dim kitchen staring at the pin. He picked it up heavier than it looked and let it rest in his palm. He traced the letters with his thumb, AFFA. He didn't know the code. He knew the weight anyway. The clock ticked. The fridge hummed. Rain tapped the window. He put the pin back on the table like a promise he hadn't agreed to yet. The bus depot hired him on a night shift before the week was out. He took it. He always took what worked, what paid, what kept the lights burning 1 more month. At 2 a.m., the building smelled like bleach and diesel, a chemical marriage that turned the tongue numb. Jack's mop traced slow arcs across the wide tile, squeak, swish, squeak, swish. He was a body in motion. If he kept moving, the thoughts chased him slower. In the break room, a battered TV burped a quiet news loop. His face flashed on screen, an ash-dirty man carrying a child through fire, and he turned away before the clip could end. He wrung the mop until the stitches tugged hot. He told himself that meant he was alive. He told himself a lot of things at 2 a.m. On his meal break, he called the hospital to check on River. The nurse recognized his voice now. "He's stable," she said. "He keeps asking about the man who wrapped him in a red flannel." Jack swallowed around something that wasn't food. "Tell him the shirt was ugly anyway." "Will do," she said, and he could hear the smile through the line. He hung up and stared at the soda machine until the buzzing turned into a kind of prayer. The package came 2 nights later. He noticed it as soon as he turned onto their street, the porch light cutting a pale triangle through the fog. Brown paper. No stamp. No name. Heavy like truth. Lily stood in the door, hair a sleep-tangled halo. "Someone left that an hour ago," she whispered, as if the package might hear her. They sat at the table together the way they did for bills and budgets and bad news. Jack slid a finger beneath the tape and peeled it back slow. Inside leather. Worn, scarred, cleaned with care. The smell hit him first oil sweat road. Not unpleasant, just honest. He lifted the vest free. Across the back in white thread prospect. The word landed like a dare. In the chest pocket something crinkled. A photo. The boy River half smiling, thumb-up cheeks still smudged with what looked like the ghost of soot. Across the bottom in thick black marker. "He still asks about you." Lily's breath hitched. Dad. Jack didn't realize he was standing until his knee bumped the table. He held the vest in both hands like it might buck and run. He didn't put it on. He didn't set it down. He just stood there, caught between the man he'd been the day before the fire and the man every minute since kept insisting he might be. Is it a gift? Lily asked. Or a test Jack's mouth tried for humor and missed? Maybe both. He draped the vest over the back of a chair. It changed the room. Not visible if you glanced quick, but if you stayed, if you breathed, something shifted. The air got thicker, the walls edged closer. Possibility or pressure he couldn't tell yet. He slept badly. In the morning, his neck hurt from the way he'd watched the vest more than he'd closed his eyes. Late afternoon, the low, familiar snarl of a Harley rolled up their curb. Lily peeked through the curtain. "It's him," she whispered, as if their apartment had become a church you ought to whisper in. Jack stepped onto the porch before anyone could knock. Hawk Malone sat the way men sit when they belong to a machine, loose and ready at once. He killed the engine, swung off the bike, and left his helmet hanging from one handlebar. No entourage this time. No thunder, just the man in the air that bent a little around him. "You got it," Hawk said, chin tilting toward the doorway like he could smell leather through drywall. Jack didn't bother pretending he didn't know what it was. "I'm not a biker. Didn't ask you to be." Hawk's voice was a dark river. "Not yet." "I'm a dad," Jack said, shrugging with the one shoulder that didn't ache. "A janitor now, I guess. A guy with a duct-taped life and a kid who deserves better. That's what I am." "Exactly why we came." Jack huffed a laugh that wasn't funny. "You keep saying we like it's an answer." "It is," Hawk said, and somehow he made two letters feel like shelter. "That vest ain't a payment. It's a door." Jack leaned against the post, the paint chalking his jacket, to what Hawk's eyes flickered, not unkind, just measuring. A table. A circle. A code that ain't written down, but you already kept it. "I didn't agree to anything," Jack said, softer than his words. "You agreed in the fire," Hawk replied. "When you chose the boy you didn't know. That's the only contract we use." Jack looked away first. Down the block, a neighbor dragged a trash can into the street lid, clattering. Somewhere a dog barked. The ordinary world went on indifferent. Hawk reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring with a charm, an angel wing silver dulled by fingers. He rolled it once between forefinger and thumb, then set it on the porch rail. "Keychain," he said, as if it were nothing. "For later." "I don't have a bike," Jack said. "You don't have to," Hawk answered. "Not to come sit. Listen, break bread. We call it church. Don't worry, we ain't holy enough to pretend otherwise." A ghost of a smile tugged his mouth. "But we do try to be honest." Jack didn't pick up the keychain. He didn't push it away either. He let it sit between them, catching a sliver of pale sun. "We rebuilt a few bikes for foster kids last Saturday." Hawk added almost as an afterthought. "Grease under our nails, cussing at stripped bolts. Laughed more than we swore. You'd have liked it." Something inside Jack, something rusted shut, shifted a quarter inch. He covered it with a joke. "I'm not sure your guys want a janitor who can't afford his own socket set." "We don't count tools," Hawk said. "We count who shows up." They stood in the easy silence that happens when men have said as much as they can say without breaking something delicate. Then Hawk nodded, turned, and swung back onto the bike. As the engine rumbled back to life, Hawk called over his shoulder. "We don't hand those out lightly." Jack couldn't tell if he meant the vest or the words. He watched the taillight shrink down the block and listened until the sound thinned into ordinary neighborhood noise again. His hands found his pockets, then the rail, then nothing. He went inside and stared at the vest until the clock said he should start for the depot. He didn't touch the keychain, but he left it on the rail like an ember cooling not dead yet. The bus depot's lights buzzed him into midnight. He mopped. He breathed. He tried to imagine a life that stayed small and safe. Every time his mind hit a gate marked with 3 letters. At 3:17 a.m., his phone vibrated in his pocket. Unknown number, the kind you ignore unless the world has already shown you that unknown numbers can change your life. He answered. "Yeah," Hawk's voice. "No hello, no preface, tomorrow. Warehouse on 5th, back door. 7 p.m. A beat. Bring the vest." The line clicked dead. Jack stared at the phone like it might offer a second opinion. It didn't. He tucked it away and finished his shift with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. When he got home, dawn had rubbed the sky raw. He didn't sleep. He brewed coffee, even though he didn't want it. He watched sunlight crawl across the table and spill over leather. At 6:30 that evening, he stood in the bedroom doorway while Lily laced her sneakers. "I have a thing," he said, fighting the urge to explain. She looked at the vest in his hands, then at his face. "I know. You good to do homework at Mrs. Avery's?" She nodded. "Text me when you're done." He tried on a smile. "Bossy." "Alive," she corrected all Turner. Jack took the stairs slow, then stopped at the bottom and glanced back. "You okay?" "I will be," she said, and that was enough. On the porch, he picked up the keychain and slid it into his pocket. The vest felt heavy when he put it on, like wearing a door you weren't sure you should walk through. The evening was warm in that cheap way spring has when it's pretending not to be winter anymore. Jack turned his collar up against a wind that didn't come, put his hands in his pockets because he didn't know what else to do with them, and walked toward 5th Street, counting his breaths to keep his courage from bolting. Behind him, the apartment window glowed. In it, Lily's silhouette lifted a hand. He lifted his back. Then he kept walking, toward whatever the fire had started. The warehouse on 5th looked like nothing, which was exactly the point. Its corrugated siding was scarred with rust, the kind of place neighbors ignored, the kind city inspectors didn't bother with, unless someone complained. The only light came from a thin strip beneath the back door, yellow against the bruised evening. Jack Turner hesitated at the threshold, his hand brushing the vest that felt heavier with every step. The word prospect stitched across his back might as well have been a target. He swallowed, pulled the door open, and stepped inside. The air smelled of gasoline, leather, and burnt coffee. A dozen heads turned as one. Silence. Men in cuts sat around a long table made from welded car doors. Their faces were stories written in scars and ink, laughter lines carved deep beside eyes that had seen too much frowns etched from years of carrying weight. They didn't move. They just watched. At the far end, Hawk sat, his presence filling the room even from a chair. His arm rested in a sling from the accident he hadn't fully healed from, but his eyes were sharp alive. Jack's boots felt too loud against the concrete as he walked forward. He wanted to shrink to disappear, but there was nowhere to hide. And then from the side, a small voice broke the silence. "Jack River." The boy ran across the warehouse, his tiny vest bouncing against his ribs, the smile on his face brighter than any light bulb strung above them. He skidded to a stop at Jack's side and tugged his hand, grinning. The tension in the room cracked just enough. Jack squeezed River's hand, feeling something inside himself loosen. He didn't belong here, not by rules or road, but maybe, just maybe, he belonged by fire. Wolf rose. The elder's beard was white as bone, his arms inked with stories from another era. His presence carried the gravity of years, the kind that made younger men straighten without being told. "You're here because you chose to run into flames," Wolf said. His voice was steady, gravel deep. "Not because you wanted reward. Not because you wore leather. Because when it came down to it, you chose." Jack's chest tightened. He opened his mouth, but Wolf lifted a hand, stopping him. "We've buried brothers who never made it that far. You didn't know the boy, didn't know us, and still you burned your own skin to save him. That ain't nothing. That's brotherhood." A murmur of agreement rolled around the table. Torque nodded once. Another man drummed fingers against the steel. Jack's throat closed. He wasn't used to being spoken about like that. Not as burden, not as failure. As something else. As chosen. Hawk stood, then wincing as his sling shifted. He walked to Jack, slow, deliberate. The warehouse held its breath. When Hawk reached him, he placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. Firm, heavy. "You don't have to ride," Hawk said. "You don't have to drink, fight, or wear that cut if it don't feel right. But know this, if you ever need us, we come. Not for money, not for glory. Just because you're one of us now." Jack blinked hard, vision blurring. He wanted to argue, to say he wasn't worthy, that he was just a janitor hanging on by threads. But the words wouldn't come. Because for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing alone. The circle closed in bikers stepping forward one by one. No speeches, no oaths, just a hand pressed against his shoulder, a nod. An unspoken acknowledgement. Jack's ribs ached. His arm throbbed. His heart pounded harder than the Harley engines outside. But for the first time, the weight he carried didn't feel like punishment. It felt like belonging. Later, after River finally let go of his hand and the meeting broke, Jack lingered by the door. The vest clung to his shoulders like a question and an answer at once. Wolf passed him on the way out, pausing just long enough to murmur, "Silence is our promise. Don't waste words. Let your hands speak." Jack nodded, unable to answer. When he stepped back into the night, the rain had stopped. The air smelled cleaner, the streets washed new. For a fleeting second, he let himself believe the storm had broken just for him. Morning broke clean and bright like the storm had decided to give South Glen a mercy day. Gutters gurgled, sidewalks held thin ribbons of rain. The air felt rinsed. Jack Turner stood at the window with the vest in his hands. Leather. Weight. The word across the back prospect felt less like a threat this morning and more like a dare. On the counter, the small angel wing keychain caught a spear of sun. He heard the bike before he saw it. A low, sure rumble rolled up the street, gathering dust-setting neighborhood dogs to a jealous chorus. Hawk Malone coasted to the curb on a black Harley carved from shadow. Behind him, another bike. Matte black low-seat bars just high enough to feel like knuckles. Hawk killed the engine. Silence dropped. "Morning," he said. Jack squinted. "You brought a parade." Hawk's mouth ticked. He tossed a ring of keys. Jack caught them out of reflex. The charm jingled small wing silver nicked by years of fingers. "This isn't mine," Jack said quickly. "It is now. I don't even know how to ride." "Then we'll teach you," Hawk said, like he was talking about breathing. "Brotherhood ain't about perfection. It's about effort." The screen door creaked. Lily stepped onto the porch hair in a messy knot, a disbelieving grin rising despite herself. She looked from the bike to the keys to Jack's face. "You're riding with them now," Jack's protest died before it found shape. He looked at his daughter, freckled nose, stubborn jaw, and heard the hiss of that night's fire like it was still in his lungs. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said, "but maybe it's time I learned something new." "What's her name?" Jack asked, nodding at the second bike. "She'll tell you," Hawk said. "Out on the strip." "What strip?" "Old County Airfield," Hawk replied, already swinging a leg over. "No traffic, no witnesses." He winked. "Best place to look like an idiot." "Great," Jack muttered. "I'm a professional at that." 7 o'clock, Hawk said, pointing at the vest. "Bring your courage." The abandoned runway made men feel like boys again. Cracked tarmac stretched toward a horizon smeared with rust and pink. Weeds pushed up through seams like stubborn hope. A row of Harleys idled shoulder to shoulder. Torque flipped a coin. Wolf stood with arms folded, an old general at parade rest. Jack swung a leg over the bike. It felt heavier than logic, lighter than despair. Hawk stood at his left shoulder, one hand on the bar, the other tapping the clutch with a knuckle. "Rule 1, Hawk said. "You're not wrestling a bull. You're asking a friend to dance. Feel the friction zone. Slow. Listen." "Listening," Jack said. He squeezed the clutch, rolled a whisper of throttle. Too much. The bike lurched and died with a cough. Laughter skittered down the line, good-natured, mean to no one. Again, Hawk said. Jack breathed. Tried again. His boot snagged a peg. He wobbled. Hawk steadied the machine with 2 fingers and a look. Again. Third try. Stall. Fourth. The front wheel shimmied and Jack's heart tried to climb through his throat. Mantork called, cupping his hands. "The ignition's on the right, not your soul." "Shut up," Jack said without heat, and the men laughed. Hawk leaned closer, voice low. "Loosen your shoulders. You're bracing for impact that ain't coming." Jack let his jaw unclench. The night smelled of gasoline and cooling earth. He found the clutch again, slower now, as if it were something living. The engine hummed. "Ease," Hawk said. "Not more. Different." Jack rolled. The bike moved. 5 feet, 10, 20. Eyes up, not at the wheel, not at the worries. Wind pressed his shirt flat to his ribs. At the end of the chalked line, he clutched in, tapped the brake, set a foot down. The world didn't explode. He didn't fall. He laughed short, startled. The men whooped. Even Wolf's mouth softened. Again, Hawk said, smiling now. They ran the length again, each time a little smoother, a little less white knuckle. Jack found that tiny place between too much and too little where throttle and clutch shook hands. Half an hour later, his forearms ached and his back sang. Take the far line, Hawk said, pointing toward a longer stretch the sun had already abandoned. Pretend it's a road. Pretend you're headed somewhere you want to go. Jack swallowed. He didn't know what that place was. He twisted the throttle anyway. The engine spoke. The horizon tugged. He moved. Wind tore at his eyes. The runway narrowed to a ribbon he could follow home. A smell like hot pennies and cut grass filled his helmet. He didn't think about bills or eviction. He didn't think about belonging. He thought about Lily on the porch steps, the easy way she had started to laugh again. He thought about a boy with a bandana on his wrist and a cough in a burning room. He let the bike run. At the far end, he looped clumsily, boots skidding. When he idled back, the crew clapped hands against their cuts, dull leather thumps that felt like applause. Torque jogged up and slapped the tank. Told you it was on the right. Eat asphalt, Jack said lightly. Later, Torque shot back. After you buy the coffee. Wolf stepped close, eyes bright beneath winter-white brows. Don't confuse noise with progress, he said low. But don't mistake stillness for peace. The words settled like seeds. Hawk lifted Jack's helmet free, not rushing the strap. You can ride, he said. Barely. You can ride, Hawk repeated. Permission, not praise. They loaded up as night laid itself down. Crickets woke. Before they scattered, Hawk nodded at the bike. She needs a name. You said she'd tell me. And Jack looked at the runway and the small world that felt a hair wider now. The answer came before he could think it away. Mercy. Hawk's grin was full this time. Mercy it is. He tapped the tank once ritual light. She'll treat you how you treat her. They rolled home slow, two bikes humming through sleepy streets. Jack stayed behind Hawk's shoulder, following the shape of his lane like a heartbeat. They stopped at the corner near Jack's duplex. Engines ticked as they cooled. Warehouse Thursday, Hawk said, casual but not. We rebuild. Kids too. I'll come, Jack said, and the words were easy. Hawk rode away. Lily sat on the porch step pretending she hadn't been listening. Her eyes scanned her father first, hands, knees, pride. Finding all three intact, she let herself look at the bike. She pretty, she said. She's Mercy, Jack replied. Lily rolled the name like candy. Can I sit? He steadied the bars while she swung a leg over. The bike settled under her like it knew a promise when it felt one. Start it, she said. Not yet. He smiled. Soon. You're different, she said as she climbed down. Bad different. Alive different. He swallowed. Yeah. A beat. Feels like starting over. They stayed like that a minute, daughter, on a bike named Mercy Father, not pretending he wasn't scared and not pretending he was either. Just here. Just breathing. When she went inside, Jack watched the street. The night held an ordinary hush. Somewhere a radio played. A dog barked once and quit. Jack touched the vest and didn't flinch at the weight. He hadn't outrun anything. He hadn't solved their bills. But he had moved. Far enough to feel wind. Inside the silver pin rested beside a stack of envelopes. He set the keys next to it, the wing bright in the weak light. Tomorrow he would mop floors again, scrub baseboards, roll a trash bin down an echoing hall at 3 a.m. He would still be the man who counted quarters and stretched pasta and pretended tired was a kind of full, but somewhere in him an engine answered back, a small, steady hum. Mercy would do. He turned off the porch light. The bike clicked as it cooled a little heartbeat against the quiet. The rhythm of Jack Turner's life became a tug-of-war between two worlds. By night, he dragged a mop across the echoing bus depot, bleach burning his throat. Trash bags heavy with the weight of other people's lives. By day, when he could steal the hours, he was pulled into the orbit of something louder, stranger, more alive, the Brotherhood. At first, he hovered at the edges. He would show up at the warehouse in the evening, still in his janitor's uniform, smelling faintly of ammonia, feeling like a child walking into a cathedral he didn't belong to. The long table made of car doors weighted the air thick with grease and coffee. Men nodded as he came in. Nobody forced him to sit. Nobody asked him to speak. But space shifted to make room, and slowly the rhythm drew him closer. It wasn't just about rides. Hawk made sure of that. One Saturday, instead of roaring down the interstate, the crew scattered wrenches across the warehouse floor. Frames of battered bikes lay in pieces destined for kids in foster care who had nothing but empty porches and long summers. Jack rolled up his sleeves and found himself shoulder to shoulder with Torque, wrestling a stubborn bolt. "Strip it, and I'll smack you," Torque warned. Jack grinned through the sweat. "You'll have to get in line." By the end of the night, his arms ached, his shirt was ruined, and grease had painted his skin, but the sight of a half-rebuilt bike, small, sturdy, waiting for a child's hands, made his chest swell with something he hadn't felt in years. Not pride. Not yet. Purpose. Lily thrived in the current, too. She and River were near inseparable now, darting through the warehouse with jokes and dares. They played cards with Torque, swapped stories with Wolf, learned how to wrap handlebars in leather. Their laughter slipped into the corners of the room, softening men who had once been hard as asphalt. Sometimes Jack caught himself staring not at the kids, but at the way the bikers looked at them with a strange protective fondness. It was the kind of watchfulness Jack thought he'd lost when his wife died, the kind that made a home feel less fragile. For the first time in years, Lily looked like she wasn't carrying the world alone with him. Then came the call. Jack had just dropped Lily at school, Mercy humming under him when his phone buzzed. The number was Hawk's. The voice on the other end was flat, stripped of all its thunder. "He's down!" Jack's heart seized. "Who?" Hawk? Torque said, quick, urgent. Truck ran a red. He was leading a toy run. "They're saying broken ribs may be worse. Hospital, now." Jack didn't wait for more. He twisted the throttle. The world blurred. The hospital lot looked like a movie scene. Dozens of bikes lined up, engines, cold helmets resting on seats like silent sentries. The waiting room inside was heavy with leather and grief. Men stood in small groups, muttering prayers, cursing under their breath. Wolf sat in the corner, his head bowed, hands knotted like rope. And River sat in a plastic chair too small, his tiny vest drowning him. He clutched a stuffed toy Jack had once given him at a charity night. His eyes were wide wet, staring at a door that wouldn't open. Lily stood beside him, her hand hovering, unsure if it was enough. Jack crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the boy. "Is he going to be okay?" River asked, his voice thin, breaking. Jack swallowed. He didn't know. No one knew. But he did what Hawk had done for him once. He placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're not alone, River," he said firm. "Certain. We're right here." The boy nodded, trembling, clutching the stuffed toy tighter. Jack stayed kneeling until the boy's shoulders eased, until Lily's hand found his and held. That night, Jack didn't go home. He paced the hall, brought coffee to nurses, even fixed a flickering light above the ICU corridor. When exhaustion dragged at him, he told himself he couldn't sit still, couldn't just wait. But in truth, he couldn't bear the thought of leaving Hawk alone behind that door. The mop in his depot had always been about survival. But this was about something else entirely. Belonging meant showing up, and Jack wasn't about to leave. The hospital had a rhythm of its own. Machines hummed, heels clicked, monitors beeped, and every few hours a door opened with news that was never enough. Hawk Malone lay behind glass tubes threading from his body, ribs shattered, leg broken in 3 places. Surgeons whispered words like uncertain and complications. Jack Turner didn't leave. He couldn't. Nurses noticed him first. A man who wasn't blood, wasn't next of kin. Yet there he was, refilling coffee urns in the waiting room, hauling blankets from the supply closet, changing light bulbs without being asked. When he couldn't fix anything else, he fixed what was in reach. "You don't have to do all that," a young nurse told him, her voice soft. "Feels better than doing nothing," Jack replied, and went back to tightening the loose screw on a wobbly chair. River slept most nights curled in a chair too big for him, his small vest bunched like armor he hadn't grown into. Lily stayed near, holding his hand, whispering stories to keep nightmares at bay. Jack watched them with a heaviness in his chest he couldn't shake. Torque noticed. One night he slid into the chair across from Jack in the cafeteria, plopping down a soda. His tattoos glared under the harsh lights, but his eyes carried something else. "You know," Torque said, "cracking the can, you're not even patched in. And you're here more than half our brothers." Jack shrugged. "I'm not trying to prove anything." Torque studied him for a long beat, then nodded. "Exactly why you already have." The days blurred, but Jack's vigil didn't. He learned the cafeteria menu by heart, the nurses' names, the pattern of the janitor's mop. He walked laps through sterile halls, every turn ending back at the ICU door. Sometimes he sat in silence, watching Hawk's chest rise and fall with the machine. Sometimes he whispered words Hawk couldn't hear. Sometimes he simply breathed as if lending some of his own would keep the man tethered. Wolf approached once, slow, steady. The elder's hand settled heavy on Jack's shoulder. No words. None needed. The weight said it all: recognition, respect. One evening, as dusk stained the windows crimson, a nurse at the ICU door stopped him. Family only. She said gently, her hand lifting to block his path. Before Jack could answer, Torque stepped up beside him, his jaw set. He is. The nurse hesitated, then let them through. Inside, Hawk lay still, wires and tubes everywhere. River's stuffed toy perched on the bedside, its seams worn from clutching. Jack stood by the window, staring at the parking lot below, where rows of Harleys gleamed under streetlights. For the first time, he believed what Torque had said. He was family now. Not by blood, not by law, but by fire and choice. That night, Jack mopped the ICU corridor himself, though no one had asked. Nurses passed, glancing curiously, but no one stopped him. He wrung out the mop, leaned it against the wall, and sat in the plastic chair outside Hawk's door. He didn't need words. Silence was its own kind of prayer. And Jack Turner prayed the only way he knew how, by not leaving. Morning came mean and thin, the color of old gauze. Jack Turner sat in the cafeteria with a paper cup cooling between his palms, the coffee skinning over at the edges the way his nerves had. He'd slept in fits on a plastic chair and dreamed in fragments, sirens, flames, the squeal of a gurney wheel in a too-bright hall. He stared at the vending machine until the humming felt like a prayer he didn't know how to say out loud. Then a nurse ran past. The cup tipped. Coffee sloshed his knuckles. Jack was on his feet before the chair finished scraping the linoleum. He broke into the hallway, hard up at his throat, and saw it, the swarm outside Hawk's room. The sudden electricity to motion that meant something had changed. River stood on his chair, both hands pressed to the glass like small, desperate birds. Jack shouldered through the cluster and stopped in the doorway. Hawk's chest rose. Not with the machine's metronome pull, but on its own. Thin. Ragged. But his. Lids fluttered. A slow blink like a man remembering how to come back from a far country. Dad River breathed, voice cracking in half. Hawk's gaze found his boy first and softened a light behind the pain. Then he worked past the oxygen and the ache to roll his eyes, slide them along the room until they landed on Jack, still ash in his hair, still the cut on his forearm, a scabbed road. Hawk's mouth pulled into something that wanted to be a smile if it weren't so tired. His voice came out torn sandpaper. Did you... A cough raked him. Keep your vest clean. Silence broke like glass in sunlight. Torque laughed first. The nurse snorted, then tried to make it a cough. Wolf let his head tip back and exhale the sound almost a prayer. River did the thing only kids can do, laughed and cried, in the same second falling forward and catching Hawk's hand as if it might float away. Jack heard himself laugh too. A short, disbelieving sound that shook something loose in his ribs. He wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist and nodded an oath in the gesture. Yeah, he said, voice rough. I kept it clean. Hawk squeezed River's fingers, let his eyes close for a breath, then opened them again to Jack. Good, he rasped. You're gonna need it. The nurse fussed. Machines adjusted their pitch to something calmer. A doctor appeared, a storm of instructions, soft but firm. Out. Give him time. The head nod that meant for now the bad news had been put back in the cabinet. They filed into the hall, the door snicking shut. River fell against Jack's side and didn't pretend he wasn't crying anymore. Jack folded the boy into him, pressed his chin to River's hair, and let the kid's small heartbeat drum a human rhythm against his own sternum. Lily stood by the wall, eyes wet and shining, a smile cracked open by relief. She reached for Jack, squeezed his arm, then touched River's back, and didn't let go. For the first time in days, the corridor smelled less like bleach and more like hope. Night came early and slow. A blanket pulled over the hospital's noise. Bikers peeled off by twos and threes, promises, muttered cigarettes burned to orange nubs in the parking lot and ground under heels. The sky held a bruise of cloud. Somewhere far off, a train cried a long, lonely note. A single flashlight flicked on. "Circle up," Wolf said quietly. They gathered between rows of sleeping bikes, leather creaking boots, scuffing gravel. No engines, no music, just men and the kind of silence that carves space for something holy without asking permission. Jack hovered at the edge before Torque hooked 2 fingers in his cut and reeled him in, not rough, just sure. The circle widened and took him like a breath. Wolf stood with the light at his feet, years of road folded into the lines on his face. He held something in his hands and let the moment grow until it could carry the weight of it. Hawk's room glowed on the 4th floor. A shape, maybe a nurse, moved behind the blinds. A small square window in a brick wall lit like a vigil candle. Wolf lifted the thing in his hands. Jack's vest. The word prospect still stitched across the back white thread like a dare in bad light. Wolf glanced to the window, then back to the circle. "When a man runs into fire for a child, he doesn't know," he said, voice low enough to make each biker lean in. "We don't say thank you." He let the words sit. Let the night carry them down the line into the bones of men who had needed those words once and almost never got them. "We say brother." He reached into a pouch and brought out the patch, the full-set colors that meant you weren't standing at the door anymore. You were inside carrying the code, whether anyone was watching or not. Wolf knelt on the asphalt, the vest across his thigh. He threaded a curved needle thick and bright and began to stitch. Shuck, pull, knot. The noise of it filled the space under their breathing, small stubborn sounds of making a thing official with hands. No speeches drowned it out, no song needed to. The needle spoke the language everybody there trusted work. Jack swallowed. His mouth was dry and his palms damp. He wanted to look away and couldn't. Each pass of the needle tugged at something in him he'd taught himself not to feel wanting to belong. Fear of not earning it, the sharp, giddy hope that maybe this time he wouldn't screw it up. River stood beside Lily at the edge of the circle, small shoulder pressed to her hip. Lily bent and whispered, but Jack couldn't hear the words. He didn't need to. Their faces said enough. When Wolf finished, he stood heavy and deliberate. He held the vest so the flashlight's cone poured over it. The patch caught the light. Leather dreamed of road. Torque moved first. He stepped into Jack and put a hand on his shoulder. No thump. No slap. Just wait. A second man did the same, then a third. The circle turned like a clock, and every hand found him one after the other like a benediction measured in touch. By the time Wolf reached him, Jack's throat had gone tight. Wolf's hand was warm and old and strong. He leaned close so the words wouldn't have to travel far. "Silence is our promise," he murmured. "We'll speak when we have to. We'll show up every time." He draped the vest over Jack's shoulders. It settled heavy and somehow lighter than anything he'd carried in years. The leather hugged his back. The patch warmed like something alive. It wasn't costume jewelry. It was a door closing behind him and a door opening ahead. Up on the 4th floor, the blinds shifted. The window cracked open on its tilt so stale air could go out and clean air could come in. Jack looked up and saw a shadow he didn't need to name. Hawk's silhouette lifted a hand. Not a wave, a witness. Torque cleared his throat. "Brothers," he said, and the word didn't need more. The circle eased apart into pairs and trios, men clapping Jack's back, saying nothing and saying everything. Lily slipped in and hugged him quick and tight, then took River's hand again as if to remind the night this is why. Wolf killed the flashlight. Darkness returned everybody to themselves. Stars pricked through the cloud as if they'd been waiting for the light to go out to get any work done. The lot smelled like oil and rain, and something cleaner like regret burning off in a smaller, sadder fire. Jack stood a long moment with the vest pulling wild, contradictory truths into the same room inside him. He was still a man who'd been fired that week. Still a janitor whose hands smelled of bleach at 2 a.m. Still the father who counted quarters and prayed over rent. And he was something else now, too. Not a hero, not a myth. A brother. "Walk you?" and Torque asked, falling into step as Jack crossed the lot. Jack shook his head. "I'm going to sit with the kid a while." Torque's grin flashed. "He'll like that." "Yeah." Jack's voice almost worked. "Me too." They reached the door where visitors entered after hours. Torque caught it with his palm and held it, then tapped the patch with 2 fingers. Looks right on you. Feels heavy, Jack admitted. Good Torque said. That means it's real. Inside, the fluorescent buzz returned like a bad habit. The elevator sided them up to the pediatric floor where River had crashed on a cot in a family room exhausted. Mercy finally catching him. Lily was there, feet tucked under her, a blanket over her knees, and a textbook open she wasn't reading. She looked up, saw the vest. Her mouth made a small O, then folded into a smile that reached her eyes. She didn't clap or cheer. She just nodded once, like the world had corrected its tilt by a degree. River's lashes fluttered. He woke like small animals do, quiet and suddenly alert. When he saw Jack, he pushed up on his elbows, hair sticking out like he'd been struck by lightning in his sleep. You were gone, he whispered. I came back. Jack crouched so they were eye level. I'll keep coming back. River's gaze slid to the patch, then back to Jack's face. He didn't ask what it meant. He didn't have to. Dad woke up, River asked. He did? Jack said. And he told a bad joke. River's mouth twitched. About the vest? About the vest, Jack confirmed. River lay back, a little smile tucked into the corner of his mouth like a coin in a pocket. The kind you keep because it makes you feel less empty. Lily handed Jack a cup of water and glanced toward the window that looked across to ICU. You going to sleep at all? Jack eased down into the chair beside River's cot and set the cup on the floor. He put his elbows on his knees and let the vest pull his shoulders square. Maybe later, he said. He wasn't tired. He was something stranger, settled, like a road after a storm, water running off into the ditch center lines bright again where the dirt had been washed away. He rested his forearms against his thighs, looked at the small rise and fall of the boy's chest, and let the night be the night. Upstairs, a machine beeped a calmer rhythm. Downstairs, bikes slept. Jack Turner closed his eyes, not to escape, but to hold the picture steady. A window lit against the dark, a kid breathing a daughter safe, a patch warm on his back, and a road that whatever else wouldn't be walked alone anymore. The weeks after Hawk woke were strange, in the way only survival makes things strange. South Glen went on with its cracked sidewalks and sagging roofs. The buses rolled out on schedule from the depot, and Jack Turner still scrubbed tile at 3 a.m. But something had shifted, an invisible current pulling him along a path he hadn't chosen but couldn't turn from. Every time he shrugged into the vest, the weight reminded him. He wasn't standing on the edge anymore. He was inside. Hawk's recovery was slow, his ribs wrapped tight, his leg in a brace. He hated the crutches, cursed the doctors, but when he sat in the warehouse chair, silence fell, as if he'd never left it. Jack took the seat one down from him, not sure when it had become his place, only knowing it felt wrong to be anywhere else. One night after the talk turned to charity runs and repairs, Hawk shifted, wincing as he leaned Jack's way. There's a boy in county lockup, Hawk said quietly. Pitched for Jack alone. Jack's brow furrowed. What about him, 17? No family, knows some of our younger guys, reached out, wants help getting out of what he's in. Hawk's eyes hardened. He's not safe where he is. Jack leaned back wary. What are you asking? Hawk tapped a finger against the table. Visit him. You're good with words. You've lived pain. He might listen to you. The next morning, Jack found himself in a narrow room that smelled of bleach and fear, a pane of thick glass separating him from a kid who looked half wild, bruised knuckles, chipped tooth eyes like a cornered animal. The boy slouched in his chair as if daring gravity to break him. Jack picked up the phone. For a beat, they just stared at each other, glass between them. Silence, heavy. Finally, Jack said, You think you're the first kid to sit in that chair like it's a throne? The boy's lip curled. What do you know about it? Jack exhaled, leaned forward. I know fire. I know fear. I know what it's like to feel like you're walking into every room with the word loser stamped on your head. He paused, throat tight. And I know what happens if you believe that stamp. The boy's bravado cracked for just a second. He rubbed his wrist against his mouth. I screwed up. Yeah, Jack said softly, so did I. So did everyone I ride with. But screwing up ain't the end. Staying there is. The kid's shoulders shook once, sharp. Then the tears came silent, furious at being seen. Jack sat with it. Let the boy cry, didn't flinch. When the guard signaled time, Jack pressed his palm flat to the glass. The boy lifted his own hesitant until their hands matched through the barrier. Jack whispered, "You're not alone, kid. Not anymore." That night back in the warehouse, Jack pulled Hawk's notebook from his pocket. He tore a scrap of receipt and scribbled the boy's name, Micah. He taped it to a page already full of lists: charity rides, hospital visits, foster kids. Lily wandered over, curious. "What's that?" Jack closed the book carefully. A reminder. To do what? He looked at her, then at River, asleep in a chair with grease smudged across his cheek. His voice was low, steady. To be the man I needed when I was younger. Later, alone in his truck, memories came like ghosts. His own father hands that smelled of beer and layoffs, fists that hit walls but never stopped shaking. The silence after fights, bills piling higher than the fridge. A house heavy with shame. Jack lit a cigarette he didn't want, let it burn to the filter, and whispered into the dark cab, "I won't be him. Not ever." For the first time, the road ahead didn't just look like escape. It looked like responsibility, and he was ready to carry it. The storm rolled in without warning, the kind that cracked the sky wide and flooded gutters in minutes. Jack Turner gripped Mercy's bars, rain stinging his face like needles as he guided the bike through South Glen's narrow streets. Lily rode behind him, helmet-tight, arms snug around his ribs. They'd just left the library when Lily tapped his side. "Dad, look." Under a flickering street lamp, a woman hunched over, clutching 2 overstuffed trash bags. Beside her, a boy, maybe 7, soaked to the bone, no jacket, shoes squelching. Their shapes were so small against the storm, it made Jack's chest ache. He pulled to the curb. "Killed the engine. Need a ride," he called over the rain. The woman hesitated, eyes darting to the vest on his back, the patch heavy with its own reputation. But the boy's teeth were chattering. Finally, she nodded. They climbed into the truck Jack had parked nearby. Lily slid over, patting the seat between her and the heater vent. "Come on," she coaxed. "It's warm." The woman's name was Rita, the boy Elijah. They'd been turned out of a shelter, no beds, no mercy left to spare. Jack drove them to the duplex, Lily chattering soft to distract Elijah from the storm. Inside, the apartment smelled of instant soup and wet socks. Jack handed Rita a towel. Lily dug out blankets. The small space filled with warmth, not from the heater, but from being shared. Before Rita left the next day, she caught Jack at the door. Her eyes were rimmed red, but steady. "No one stops anymore," she whispered. "Not like that." Jack's reply came easy. "Kindness isn't a luxury. It's a choice." She squeezed his hand and left with Elijah, bundled tight. It wasn't the last fire that found him. Just after midnight, sirens woke the neighborhood. Jack bolted upright, the smell of smoke already curling through the window. Not their place. 2 streets over. A laundromat. By the time he reached it, firefighters had roped the perimeter, but voices screamed someone was still inside. He didn't think. He never did when the flames called. Boots hit wet pavement. Then he was through the side door, smoke clawing down his throat, the world hot and choking. He found an old man pinned behind a folding table, his leg trapped by debris. "Hang on," Jack rasped. He heaved, pain screaming through his ribs until the table gave. He dragged the man through a haze of sparks, lungs burning, legs stumbling. They broke through the back door just as the ceiling collapsed behind them with a roar. Flashbulbs hit him instantly, cameras already there, voices shouting his name. Hero of South Glen. Jack sank to the curb, covered in ash, coughing blood and smoke. He clutched the old man's hand, whispering to himself more than anyone else, still breathing. The man didn't let go. By morning, the news looped the footage. Jack ignored it. He sat at the kitchen table with Lily, her small hand wrapped around his wrist. "You don't run from fire," she said quietly. Jack shook his head. "Some flames you walk into. Others, you're built to carry." The silver pin on the table caught the morning light, a reminder of a promise he hadn't spoken but had already kept. And in his chest, beneath the ash and the scars, something whispered louder than the headlines. This wasn't about being a hero. It was about never letting anyone burn alone. By Thursday night, the warehouse had the hush of a church after a funeral. The big overhead bulbs hummed. A space heater clicked in the corner. Somewhere a drip in the roof kept time in a metal pan. The long table made of welded car doors waited, scuffed and scarred edges gleaming where years of elbows had polished them. One chair stood empty at the head. Hawks. It was not a decoration. It was an absence you felt in the sternum. Someone had laid his sunglasses there folded as if they might hold his place the way names hold a prayer. Doctors had sent him home for rest after a setback pain. Spike's dizzy spells, just a few days, they said. In a family like this, days felt like seasons. Bikes ticked as they cooled in the lot. Men filtered in leather creaking boots, thudding voices dropping automatically under the rafters. Wolf stood near the head of the table, hands on the back of Hawk's chair, the posture of a man who knew his own weight and exactly when to use it. Torque bounced on his heels, restless, a dog that needed a job. Jack Turner came in quietly. He slipped the vest off his shoulders and hung it on the back of a chair. The patch caught the light and then settled into shadow like it preferred the work of night. Jack's eyes went to the empty chair on instinct and then away by choice. He took the spot one down, same place he'd occupied for weeks, the place that had become his without him noticing. Wolf rapped knuckles once on steel. The sound rang clean. Church, he said, because the word meant sit, listen, and tell the truth. Reports rolled the way they always did. A battery fund for single moms. A foster kid who needed a winter coat. The shop that had offered a discount to AFFA use it if you need it not to show off. Jack took notes with a stub of pencil in Hawk's notebook. Careful letters that looked steadier than he felt. He'd grabbed the ledger out of habit when he arrived the way you grab your tools, but it wasn't his, not officially. The leather was warm from many hands. The pages carried Hawk's scrawl dates, addresses, first names underlined with road dust, each line a promise paid or pending. When the list ran out, silence pooled again. Torque cut it with a sideways grin. You gonna just stand there looking like a marble statue? Old man, he said to Wolf. Or are we gonna talk about the giant empty chair in the room? A few men chuckled because Torque was the kind of trouble people made room for. Wolf's mouth twitched once. Then his eyes cut to Jack. Get up, Wolf said. Jack blinked. Me. Wolf's chin jerked at the head of the table. Chair's not a shrine. It's a responsibility. Hawk said, if he wasn't here, you sit. A murmur moved like wind through tall grass. Not dissent, not applause. Consideration. Jack felt the floor tilt a degree. He opened his mouth to protest and found no words that didn't sound like fear pretending to be humility. He looked toward the door as if Hawk might walk in right then and erase the need for choosing. He didn't. Torque clapped a palm to the small of Jack's back and nudged. Don't make me carry you like a bride, Turner. Jack stood because his legs obeyed strangers more easily than his doubts. He moved to the head, each step measured the way you approach a ledge. He rested both hands on the cool, scarred metal of the car door table and waited until the room breathed the same pace he did. I don't want to take a man's seat while he's still breathing, Jack said, voice even, but I'll hold it warm until he gets back. That did it. Men leaned in, some nodded, and the air let go. He didn't launch into speeches. He didn't try to sound like Hawk. He did what Wolf had told him weeks earlier, let his hands speak. He flipped the notebook open and started with names. Rita, he said, and the room made a sound men make when they remember the people attached to a name. Her boy's shoes have holes. I can hit the thrift in the morning. Do it, Wolf said. Micah. Jack's fingers brushed the taped scrap in the margin. County lockup. I'll go again Saturday. He asked for a GED book. Lily's got one. Torque raised 2 fingers. I'll go with. Jack nodded thanks. He moved on. Shelter, back of St. Bridget's Elijah, and 3 more kids need helmets for the bikes we're finishing. Done, someone said from down the table. I've got a line at the salvage lot. By the time they made it around, the notebook had gained new lines and the room had shed tension like a heavy coat. Work, not words. That was the code. Anything else, Jack asked. Silence. Then Wolf's voice low. One more thing. Jack waited. Wolf slid the sunglasses off Hawk's chair and hooked them in his vest pocket. Then he lifted a small canvas sack from the floor and set it on the table. He opened it and drew out a stamp iron heavy handle worn smooth. He warmed it with a torch, the hiss brightened the hush, then pressed it into a scrap of leather until the smell of singed hide rose. When he lifted it, the mark was clean a wing and a flame, the small sign Jack had designed for the kids' patch at the open ride. Wolf held the leather up so the room could see. "This stays," Wolf said. "Charity rides. Foster builds. Second chances. That's the front of our house. Leather. Heat. A symbol made with a tool, not a printer." The room answered with the smallest sound, men exhaling like something fragile inside them had been named correctly. Torque caught Jack's eye and grinned. He mouthed, "It's you, man." Jack shook his head once and looked down, embarrassed and grateful and terrified in equal parts. Church dismissed itself the way storms do without fanfare. Men drifted out in pairs, tapped Jack's shoulder, squeezed his forearm, spoke soft without moving their mouths much. Wolf hung back. He watched Jack close the notebook, then tap the cover with a blunt finger. "He told me you'd try to give it back," Wolf said. "He told me to stop you." Jack searched for a joke and found none. "Feels like stealing a man's steering wheel." "It's not," Wolf answered. "It's keeping the truck pointed straight till he climbs back in." He held out a small tin of leather balm, the kind you rub into old things so they don't crack where it matters. For that, he said, meaning the notebook, meaning the work, meaning whatever kept breaking and needed tending. Jack took the tin. It felt heavier than its size allowed. "You think I'm ready?" Wolf's white brows rose the smallest amount. "I think you're already doing it." Ready is just a word people use when they want permission. He reached past Jack and tapped the table. "You don't have permission. You have responsibility." Torques reappeared in the doorway like mischief with a pulse. "You two finished defining philosophy," he said. "Some of us gotta pee." Out, Wolf said, and Torque laughed and disappeared. Jack slid the notebook under his arm. He looked at the empty chair one last time, nodded to it, the way men nod to gravestones they don't want to leave, and clicked off the space heater. The night outside was cold enough to make breath visible. The line of bikes wore dew like a thin armor. Jack stood beside Mercy and let the quiet touch him. He wasn't waiting for epiphanies. He was collecting himself in small pieces the way you pocket screws. When something falls apart, you don't know where each goes, yet only that you'll need them. His phone buzzed. A text from Hawk. "How'd it go?" Jack typed and erased 3 answers, then sent the truest. "We kept the lights on. 3 dots. Then, that's the work. Proud of you." Jack swallowed against the sudden thickness in his throat. He slid the phone away and kicked Mercy to life. The engine didn't roar. It agreed. He rode home, slow city lights turning the wet streets into broken necklaces. Lily was at the kitchen table, textbooks spread hair up in a lopsided bun that said, "I tried." A pot of chili steamed on a coaster, a smell like a memory you don't know you had. She looked up as Jack came in. Her eyes flashed to the notebook under his arm. "Kids know when the thing you're carrying isn't paper." "How was church?" she asked. A smile tucked at the corners the way you tuck a blanket around sleeping children. He set the notebook down gently as if it might bruise. "We got through the list." He pulled 2 bowls from the cabinet. "Micah needs a GED book." "Already put mine in your backpack," she said. He paused, then laughed softly. "Of course you did." They ate with the windows cracked because Chili likes a little cold air to argue with. The neighborhood murmured, TVs, a couple bickering mildly, a dog that had a lot to say about raccoons. After Lily thumbed the notebook's edge. "Can I see?" Jack hesitated, then slid it over. She turned pages with careful fingers, eyes moving like someone reading a story they want to last. She pointed at a line. Elijah, helmet size, small. "Yeah." She pulled her phone, typed a note, then looked up. "You going to keep the chair?" He leaned back, stared at the ceiling where the paint had begun to spiderweb. "It's his, and tonight I kept it warm." He rubbed the back of his neck with work-sore fingers. "Wolf says ready is just a word people use when they want permission." Lily smiled at that. "Sounds like something he'd carve into a barn." "Probably has," Jack said. She closed the notebook and pushed it back across the table. "Don't let him down." He held her gaze. "I'm more worried about letting you down." "You won't?" she said in that infuriating way children have of being both naive and right. "You can't. You're you." He huffed a laugh. "That's what scares me." She reached across and squeezed his wrist where the old glass scar had turned a mottled line. "You're not the same you." They cleared dishes. He wiped the counter in slow circles while she rinsed domestic liturgy. On the hall wall, the framed prospect vest caught a bit of streetlight and threw it back a tired star. Before bed, Jack took the notebook to his room. He sat on the edge of the mattress and opened it to a blank page. He stared until the lines went blurry, then wrote in block letters, because sometimes you need things to look like they won't be knocked over. Don't confuse noise with progress. Don't mistake stillness for peace. Show up, don't run. He capped the pen and set the ledger on the nightstand. The tin of balm sat beside it, small and patient. He rubbed a thumb over the lid and thought about old leather and new responsibility about keeping both from cracking under weather they didn't choose. He lay back not to escape but to listen. Apartment hum, the distant laugh of a man on a phone in the alley, the soft thud of Lily's door closing. Inside his chest, a different rhythm found him, the steady, unshowy beat of a life that had chosen him back. He was not wearing a crown. He was holding a door. And in the morning, he would open it again. The vest framed on the hallway wall drew every visitor's eye. It was nothing fancy, just a square of old glass nailed over wood, the leather inside cracked stiff and smelling faintly of smoke whenever you opened the case. Across the back, crooked white stitches spelled a word that meant beginning prospect. Most people asked the same question when they saw it. Why frame something so worn? And it was always Lily who answered, clear and proud, because that's the one he bled in, the one that marked the start. Life didn't turn golden after Hawk's recovery and Jack's patching. The bus depot still wanted floors scrubbed. Rent still needed quarters stacked neat. Lily still had algebra to wrestle with, and Jack still had to remind her that failing a test didn't mean failing life. But something in their apartment had shifted. The air carried less weight. The walls held more laughter. The table didn't feel like a battlefield of unpaid bills anymore. It felt like a place where plans could start. River spent more nights there now, sprawled on the couch with comic books, or helping Lily with fractions. He had a way of making chores lighter, like sweeping the kitchen was an adventure if you whistled off key loud enough. Jack watched the kids together, the bruises life had given them, softening in each other's company, and thought this is what being chosen feels like. The Brotherhood's work stretched wider, and Jack found himself at the center more often than the edges. They rode out on Saturdays not to bars, but to shelters tucked behind churches or underpasses. They rebuilt bikes, donated jackets, delivered boxes of canned food. The patches on their backs carried weight, but it wasn't just fear anymore. It was recognition. One afternoon, Jack sat at a table in a drafty hall, sewing patches onto tiny denim jackets with Wolf grumbling beside him. "Never thought I'd live to see the day I was teaching a janitor to stitch," Wolf muttered, threading his needle again. Jack grinned. "Never thought I'd live to see the day you didn't break a needle in half, trying to prove a point." Wolf's chuckle rumbled like an engine idling. The room smelled of fabric leather and burnt coffee. River darted between tables with Lily handing out sodas, their laughter echoing off cinderblock walls. Jack's chest ached in a way that wasn't pain, but being part of something bigger meant weight. At night, after Lily had gone to bed, Jack sometimes sat at the kitchen table staring at Hawk's notebook. Names filled the pages, some underlined, some with arrows pointing to new needs. It wasn't just a ledger. It was a map of lives tethered to theirs. He knew what it meant. Each line was a promise, and promises once written could burn if not kept. Jack felt the weight like a stone in his ribs. Responsibility. Fear of failing not just his daughter now, but everyone who'd started to count on him. But when he looked at the framed vest in the hall, stiff with smoke and history, he remembered fire doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it forges. One night, as rain whispered against the windows, River fell asleep on the couch. Lily draped a blanket over him, then padded to her room. Jack stood a moment watching the boy's chest rise and fall, steady, safe. He whispered to the quiet, almost as if to his old self, the one who'd been alone in a kitchen stacked with bills, "We're not burning anymore." The apartment hummed around him. Small, simple, but whole. And for Jack Turner, that was enough to keep walking into fire again tomorrow. The morning sky was a thin wash of blue when the crew gathered bikes lined like steel horses along the cracked lot behind St. Bridget's. The air smelled of dew gasoline and the faint sweetness of donuts someone had dropped on a folding table. Inside the church shelter, children pressed faces to the windows, wide-eyed, the rumble of Harleys rattling the glass like a promise. Jack Turner killed Mercy's engine and swung off, tugging the helmet free. He felt the weight of the patch settle on his back, the way a flag settles on a soldier's shoulders. Not costume, not pride, but responsibility. Torque was already tossing footballs to a group of kids. Wolf crouched by a rusted Schwinn, showing a boy how to loosen a bolt without stripping the threads. Laughter floated out into the parking lot, mixing with the growl of idling engines. River ran straight to Lily, dragging her toward a table where small helmets and jackets waited. They began handing them out, their chatter soft but certain, as if they'd done this 100 times. Jack found himself beside a teenager who wasn't moving. The boy leaned against the wall, arms crossed tight, eyes dark hollows that darted everywhere but at the patch on Jack's chest. "You don't look like the guys on TV," the kid muttered finally. Jack sank onto the curb beside him, close enough to share space, far enough not to crowd. "Good," he said simply. "I don't want to." The boy snorted, not quite a laugh, not quite anger. Jack pulled off his cut slowly and set it across the kid's shoulders. The leather sagged heavy, but the boy didn't shrug it off. "Sometimes the road back starts with just feeling warm again," Jack said. They sat like that for a while, the hum of laughter and the squeak of bike chains painting the background. The boy didn't speak, but his fingers curled into the vest, holding it like a lifeline. Later, Hawk limped over with his crutch, watching Jack from under the brim of his cap. "You're good at this," Hawk said. Jack shrugged, wiping grease from his hands. "I'm just trying not to screw it up." "That's exactly why you're right for it," Hawk replied. His voice held no thunder, only steady belief. Jack met his eyes, and for a moment the noise of the lot faded. He saw himself reflected not as a man failing bills, but as a man keeping promises. As the sun slid lower, kids circled bikes, their laughter sharper, freer. Lily and River handed out candy, their arms brushing their smiles easy. Torque revved an engine once just for show, and the shelter's windows rattled with squeals of delight. Jack stood back, hands on his hips, watching the scene unfold. He felt the scar on his arm itch under the bandage, a reminder of fire. He touched the patch on his chest, a reminder of family. For the first time in years, both felt like the same thing. That night at the kitchen table, Lily traced her finger over Hawk's notebook, where Jack had scribbled new names. "You think we'll remember all of them?" she asked. Jack looked at her, the framed vest glowing faintly on the wall behind her. "We will," he said. His voice was certain. "We have to." Heat lay on South Glen like a heavy hand. Even the pigeons moved slower, picking along the roofline of the old mill where the crew had gathered. Engines idled low chrome, wincing in the sunlight. The smell of hot rubber and gasoline floated over cracked pavement over the folding tables Lily and River had set with coolers of water and paper plates. A hand-painted banner sagged from 2 nails. "Food Drive St. Bridget's Pantry." Jack Turner rolled Mercy into the line and killed the engine. The patch settled on his back as if it had been waiting for the heat to press it there. He pulled off his helmet, wiped his neck with the hem of his t-shirt, and looked around. They'd done rides like this before. But today the eyes were different. Men drifted toward him with questions they used to take to Hawk. Routes pickup times, who rode sweep, who watched the kids when the unloading started. Torque tossed him a clipboard like a football. Wolf leaned on a cane he pretended was a prop and waited for Jack to speak. Hawk stood near the shade-line crutch, under one arm, face drawn, in that brave, irritated way men wear when their bodies won't do what their pride insists. He watched everything without moving much. Jack cleared his throat, not to get attention, he already had it, but to buy a second to steady the inside of his ribs. "2 groups," he said. "Wolf, you take the north route, Maple Market, then the church lot. Torque, you and I'll hit the south side. There's a mom and pop on Pine that said they'd hold 3 crates for us, but they close early if business is dead. Don't let it be." A few chuckles, a few nods. "Prospects." Jack added, "Ride the middle. If you're new, you're not proving anything today. You're delivering food. Don't be pretty, be safe. Eyes up, hands loose. Save your showing off for..." "Never." Torque snorted. "He means me." "I always mean you," Jack replied, and the laughter loosened the last knot. They broke to mount up. Hawk caught Jack's sleeve as he went by and pulled him a step into the shade. "You run it," Hawk said. Not a question. A simple fact that landed like a weight and like relief at the same time. Jack looked at the crutch. Hawk followed his glance with a wry half-smile. Doctor says I'm stubborn. Said I could ruin the repair if I play hero. I told him I didn't know any heroes, only idiots. You looked in a mirror lately, Jack asked. Everyday Hawk said, then sobered. Listen, I'm not going to be the man in the wind for a while. When they look around, I need them not to see a hole. They need to see you. Jack's mouth went dry. I'm not... Hawk shook his head. Best leaders never ask for it. They get chosen, usually by fire. He reached into a pocket and pressed something into Jack's palm, a small round coin edges, worn smooth, stamped with wing and flame. Old chapter coin. Keep it. If you drop it, you buy coffee for the table. Jack glanced at the coin, then at the faces waiting for the throttle to roll. I can buy coffee, he said, but the joke fell short of the tremble he was hiding. You can carry this, Hawk replied, and that was the end of it. They took the streets in two neat snake's pipes, low staggered formation prospects tucked safe in the middle like seeds in a pod. South Glen watched them pass the way. Small towns do, some with suspicion, some with gratitude. Most with that hungry curiosity that rises when a reputation walks by on two wheels. At the first light, a funeral procession edged across the intersection line of sedans with little flags, hazard lights blinking amber grief. Jack put a hand up and rolled to a stop, and his line echoed the gesture like a shadow. Helmets came off. Engines clicked quiet. A grandmother in the lead car looked out, and for a moment her eyes landed on Jack. She put a palm to her heart. He nodded back. Respect moved faster than rumor. On Pine they found the mom-and-pop two elderly owners' aprons, flour-dusted 3 crates of canned beans, and bags of rice stacked by the door. Torque started to heave one up, just as a minivan pulled in steam, sighing from under its hood. A woman in a sundress climbed out, panic in her eyes, 2 kids arguing in the back seat like they were paid to. We've got it, Jack told Torque, then turned to the minivan. Pop the hood. The woman hesitated, scanning patches, evaluating risk the way women in small towns learn to do too early. Jack kept his hand's visible voice easy. We're not going to charge you to be neighborly. She popped it. He peered in, motioned for a rag, did the ritual check, the leak, the belt, the cap. Not a miracle, not nothing. Enough to get her to a shop. By the time he wiped his hands, the old man from the store had carried out a bag of ice pops like a peace offering. The kids from the minivan went from sullen to ecstatic in a breath. Torque distributed the pops with the gravity of a priest. The woman thanked them until it got awkward. Jack shrugged it away. We're just the middlemen. Back on bikes, Torker rode up beside Jack and bumped helmet to helmet. You do know you can't fix every car in this town on a Saturday. I can try, Jack said. Yeah, Torque laughed. That's the problem. By early afternoon, the lot behind St. Bridget's looked like a postcard somebody could sell to people who didn't believe in towns like this anymore. Kids darted between bikes. Old men told lies about engines to anyone who would suffer them. Coolers sweated. A boombox did its best impression of a sound system. The pantry's back door swung on tired hinges, women in hairnets forming a chain line for boxes. Jack worked the middle, where work is always needed. He lifted crates, directed traffic, read people's faces the way you read weather. Every so often, he'd find Hawk's eyes across the lot, watchful, measuring and something warmer than approval under it. Wolf moved like a slow tide, offering a joke here, a hard word there. A city official came, the kind who wore smiles like policy, polite, careful, a little scared. He shook Hawk's hand and thanked him for the community partnership, then drifted toward Jack, reading the room well enough to know where the center was. You're Jack Turner, the official said. He reached for a noun and picked the one the TV taught him. Hero. Jack kept his face friendly. I'm a dad with a strong back on a good day. The official's grin faltered, then recovered. Well, South Glen appreciates you. He gestured vaguely at the banner, the kids, the bikes. All of you. Appreciation is good, Jack said. You know what's better? A freezer that doesn't die every other week. Pantry loses half its meat when it does. The man blinked, recalibrated. I think we can do something about that. Good, Jack said, already turning to catch a crate sliding toward the edge. Talk to Sister Eileen inside. She has specs. The official went pulled along by the current Jack had set moving. Torque sidled up, chewing an ice pop like a cigar. You just shook City Hall down and didn't even raise your voice. Still counts if the freezer stays on, Jack said. Wolf Passing murmured, You anchor them, son. Don't forget to anchor yourself. Jack felt the words settle low in his chest. An anchor keeps a ship from drifting, but it also keeps it from moving at all. He tucked that away for later. For now, crates and kids, and a city man who might for once keep his word. The first crack came at dusk, small but sharp. A prospect Nate 19 all elbows and eagerness argued with another rider about who got to take point on the final ride-out. Voices climbed, arms went wide, the kind of swell that can ruin a day if you let it. Jack didn't. He stepped in palms up, not to force, but to occupy space. Point goes to experience, he said quietly. Experience goes to the man who listened more than he talked today. He looked at Nate. You rode clean. You helped load. You caught Mrs. Keegan's bag of rice before it hit the ground. Good work. Nate's jaw tightened, then loosened as the recognition found him. Yeah, he muttered. Okay. Jack clapped his shoulder once. Middle's where we protect each other. Not a demotion. It's the job. The tension leaked away like air from a bad tire. Wolf gave a tiny nod. Torque mouthed smooth and spun off to distract Nate with a chore before his pride remembered to sulk. Hawk eased up beside Jack, metal crutch-biting gravel. You're doing it, he said simply, not talking them into line, lining up and letting them choose to fall in. Jack stared at the last light burning under the mill's eaves, a thin band of gold, before night took the lot back. My old man yelled, he said. It worked until it didn't. Then it broke everything. He swallowed. I promised myself I'd never lead like that. Hawk's face softened, the rare expression that stripped years. We carry our fathers one way or another. He tapped his crutch to the ground. You're carrying yours in the right direction. They watched Lily and River finish handing out the last of the helmets for the kids who didn't get there early, the ones who always came late to everything because life never started on time for them. River showed a little boy how to buckle his chin strap. Lily winked and stole his nose the way ants do when they're really sisters to the world. How's the leg? Jack asked. Honest, Hawk said. And honesty hurts. He looked at Jack, the look a man uses to pass a torch without making a speech. Time's coming. We'll do it right. Not tomorrow. Not loud. But right. Jack felt it land. Heavy, true, terrifying. He wanted to say he wasn't ready, but Wolf's line crossed his mind. Ready is just a word people use when they want permission. He didn't need permission. He had a ledger and a freezer to fix and a kid in lockup who asked for a GED book. He had Lily's laughter and River's trust and mercy humming beneath him when the road asked if he still wanted it. Okay, Jack said, when it's time. Hawk's mouth curved. Look at you, saying yes before you know the cost. Jack huffed out a breath that was almost a laugh. Ain't that the job? Night fell like a curtain. Engines turned low and then off. The lot emptied to quiet footprints and tire marks stitched across dust. Jack and Lily packed the last folding table into the back of a pickup. River curled against a stack of jackets and dozed thumb pressed to a new patch, like he could keep it from blowing away. At home, the apartment breathed cool. The framed vest caught a thread of streetlight and wore it like a medal. Lily made tea. Jack set Hawk's coin beside the silver angel wing keychain on the counter, two small circles of metal catching like they were listening to each other. You looked like a captain today, Lily said. No T's in it. Jack shook his head, eyes on the coin. I looked like a man trying not to drop anything. That's leadership, she said, simple as gravity, not dropping anything you can help. He let the truth of that soak in. Then he took the notebook to the table and opened it to a blank page. He wrote in that steady block hand that made his doubts sit up straight. Freezer for pantry call. City Monday. Micah GED book Saturday. Nate ride middle again praise in front of group. He added one more line for himself. Anchor the work. Don't sink with it. Lily leaned in the doorway, mug cupped in both hands. We did good, Dad. We did. He agreed. Then quieter, like a man daring to name the thing that used to run from him. We'll keep doing good. He closed the notebook and rubbed a thumb over the old leather cover as if balm had already been worked into it. In the hall, the prospect vest watched, cracked and perfect, the first proof that beginnings can be framed without ending. Tomorrow would bring bills and brooms and the hiss of bleached tile. It would bring names and lists and engines. Maybe another coin in the pocket. Maybe another weight on the shoulder. He felt ready not because the fear had left him, but because the fear had learned to ride pillion and shut up when the road needed listening. Jack turned off the kitchen light. Mercy clicked as she cooled on the curb. Somewhere a late train cut through town, the sound low and long and full of going. He let that sound carry him forward, because forward was the only direction he knew. The summer leaned heavy on South Glen's sticky nights that left sheets tangled and restless. The depot's bleach stink clung to Jack Turner's hands even after 2 showers, and the weight of Hawk's notebook pressed against his nightstand, like a reminder that responsibility didn't sleep. He sat on the porch one evening, Mercy cooling at the curb, cicadas loud in the dark. Lily dozed inside with River crashed on the couch, their laughter from earlier still echoing faintly in his ears. Jack lit a cigarette he wouldn't finish. The smoke curled up like questions. That's when Hawk showed. The sound of his bike wasn't the thunder it once was. Hawk rode slower these days, his body heeling unevenly, the crutch lashed to the sissy bar like a stubborn flag. He killed the engine at the curb and stayed seated, helmet dangling from 2 fingers. You ever think about something more permanent? Hawk asked without preface. Jack frowned. Like what? Bigger vest? Hawk chuckled, gravel low. Nah. Leadership. The word landed between them heavier than the humid air. Jack shifted in his chair, ash trembling at the end of the cigarette. You want me to run the chapter? Not tomorrow. Not loud. But soon Hawk said, swinging his leg carefully over and settling on the porch step with a wince. You've got what it takes. Steady hands, right heart. People already listen to you because you've been where they are. You didn't ask for this. That's why it's real. Jack rubbed his jaw eyes on the street. I was just a janitor cleaning floors a year ago. Exactly, Hawk said. That's the point. Jack didn't answer. His mind chewed on the words like gravel under tire. He remembered bills stacked high enough to block out hope nights. He thought Lily deserved better than a man half drowning. He remembered fire and a boy coughing through smoke, and a brotherhood that had pulled him from the ash, not with applause, but with silence that meant stay. Hawk's hand clapped his shoulder steady. You've already been leading, brother. This would just make it official. Later that night, Jack sat at Lily's bedside. She was asleep, textbook still open, pencil marks smeared across the page. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, then whispered to the dark, I don't know if I'm ready. But deep down he knew. He'd been ready the moment he ran into that burning trailer. Days stretched. The Brotherhood leaned more often on Jack, though no one said it out loud. Torque asked his advice before runs. Wolf slipped him names and addresses without explanation. Even prospects looked to him for cues when to laugh, when to shut up, when to move. It terrified him. It humbled him, and it made him stand straighter. One Sunday afternoon, Lily and River sat on the porch duct taping a toy motorcycle back together, their giggles sharp in the warm air. Jack sat on the steps, pretending to read an old book, watching them with the quiet awe of a man who knew joy when he saw it. Dad, Lily asked suddenly, looking up, Are you happy? The question caught him mid-breath. He set the book down slowly, heartbeat loud. Why do you ask? She shrugged, casual but not careless. You do a lot. For them, for everybody. But I never hear you say it. Jack leaned back against the railing, staring at the yard where weeds fought for sunlight. Memories pressed in, nights in a truck seat because rent had slipped through his fingers, the acrid sting of fire. The silence of a hospital corridor. But also laughter over Chilly River's hand clutching his through smoke. Hawk's voice rasping, Did you keep your vest clean? Happiness wasn't fireworks. It wasn't a winning lottery ticket. It was this, his daughter's voice, steady, in a place he'd almost lost her to despair. I think Jack said slowly, happiness is quiet, like watching you laugh on a porch I never thought we'd have. Lily's smile spread small and certain. So yeah, Jack added, voice thick. I'm happy. And you're the reason I didn't burn out a long time ago. She reached over, squeezed his hand, and for a moment the world narrowed to that porch that afternoon. That truth. In the distance, an engine echoed off the hills, reminding him that responsibility still called. But for that breath, that porch, Jack Turner let himself believe it, that he had walked through fire and come out forged, not broken. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to lead. Spring opened slow in South Glen, washing soot from the curbs, pushing green shoots through cracks in the sidewalks. The town smelled of thawing dirt and gasoline, a mix Jack Turner had come to recognize as a season all its own. The Brotherhood called their first open ride of the year. Not a bar run, not a stunt, a family day. Music, food, and enough noise to let the city know they weren't just shadows on chrome, they were part of its pulse. The flatbed truck doubled as a stage. Folding tables sagged with casseroles and store-bought pies coolers, heavy with sodas. Kids swarmed between rows of bikes like they'd stumbled into a carnival. The mayor even showed stiff in a suit too warm for the day, shaking hands and smiling tight. Jack wore the full patch now snug across his shoulders, leather, broken in enough to feel like skin. He moved through the crowd with Mercy's key in one pocket and Hawk's coin in the other. Lily walked beside him, River bouncing ahead, their laughter cutting through the rumble of pipes and chatter of voices. When the mic came his way, Jack hesitated. He'd never liked stages. But Hawk, leaning heavy on his crutch, nodded once from the front row. Wolf folded his arms, waiting. Torque hollered speech loud enough to make kids laugh. So Jack stepped up. The sun glared off the chrome, blinding and holy, all at once. He squinted out at the sea of faces, bikers, mothers, city men, children with cotton candy on their cheeks. "I used to think family was something you were born into, Jack," began, voice low but carrying. "Blood, name, the kind of thing you didn't get to choose." The lot hushed. "But I learned family is also something you build. With your hands, with your choices. Sometimes with fire." He paused, thumb grazing the scar on his forearm, the one he'd earned pulling River out of the flames. "Fire doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it forges." He held up a small patch, a wing wrapped in flame, the design stitched on scraps of leather at Wolf's bench. "This is for anyone who's walked through fire and chose kindness on the other side." The crowd murmured soft, caught in the weight of it. Jack stepped down, knelt in front of River, and pinned the patch to the boy's tiny vest. River's grin split, wide eyes shining. Then Jack turned to Lily, pinning another to the back of her denim jacket. She reached up, squeezed his hand, the gesture saying more than applause ever could. People clapped. Some cried. Even the mayor cleared his throat too loud, pretending it was the wind. That night, after the lot emptied and bikes scattered back to homes and highways, Jack sat on Mercy's seat under a sky bruised purple with stars. The smell of grilled burgers and spilled soda still lingered. Lily leaned against his shoulder. River perched on the step nearby, spinning the patch on his vest between fingers like it was magic. Jack let his eyes wander the constellations. He wasn't chasing anything. Not anymore. He was thanking. For fire survived. For roads ahead. For the family that wasn't born of blood but of choice and scars, and the silence of men who showed up. The stars blinked back steady as engines cooling in the dark. Jack Turner smiled quiet and true, because he wasn't riding alone anymore. Morning came wrapped in courthouse gray low clouds, cold marble echoes that made even whispers sound like verdicts. Jack Turner stood on the steps with his hands in his vest pockets, feeling the coin Hawk had given him click softly against Mercy's key. Lily and River flanked him like small, stubborn sentries. Torque lounged 2 steps down, pretending not to be nervous. Wolf gazed across Main Street as if measuring wind. Inside, a bailiff barked names, papers shuffled, shoes scuffed. The world went on judging itself. Micah came through a side door and County Orange, wrists cuffed, chin tilted the way kids tilt their heads when shame is a weight they refuse to show. He scanned the benches, his eyes snagged on Jack. Something in his shoulders fell and set again. Jack lifted 2 fingers in a hello that wasn't loud, wasn't small. "I'm here." The public defender looked 12 and terrified. The DA looked like a man who had once been 12 and terrified and had sworn never again. The judge looked tired in a way that seemed permanent. People rose. Micah Ramirez, the clerk, read, probation violation, possession with intent. Intent. Jack hated that word. Intent let people imagine the worst version of a kid and pretend it had been proven. The hearing churned forward, sterile language clipping off the edges of real life. The DA recited a list of maybes like they were already photographs. The defender spoke of context of mothers who worked nights and lived with men who broke things of schools that treated boys like problems long before they learned math. Words like supervision and program hit the air and fell without sticking. Then the judge peered over his glasses. "Mr. Ramirez," he said, "your file reads like a map with no road out. Why should I believe this time will be different?" Micah swallowed. He looked at the table, then at the patch on Jack's chest. Terrified, brave, 16 things at once. Because I want to be different. The judge sighed. The DA stood to object to something that hadn't happened yet. The defender sat like a man already losing. Jack stood. "Your Honor." The courtroom turned toward Leather, whether it wanted to or not. The bailiff's hand went to his belt out of habit. Wolf did not move. Torque rolled his neck and stared at the ceiling like he had read this play before. The judge's gaze slid to the patch to Jack's face to the hallway headline that still lived in the town's memory: man runs into fire. "You are Jack Turner," he said. "I'm with him." He nodded toward Micah. "And with them." He gestured vaguely at the door, meaning the club, without saying the words that made some people stop listening. "If I may speak." The DA opened his mouth. The judge lifted a hand. Briefly. Jack didn't try to sound like a lawyer. He didn't try to sound like a hero. He let his voice be what it was, plain, rough, honest. "This kid's scared," he said. "Scared turns into stupid fast, and stupid turns into permanent even faster. I know that road. I lived on it." He let the room hold the sentence. "We have a structure. Work check-ins, GED prep curfew tighter than the lid on a paint can. He'll rebuild bikes for kids who need them more than he does. I'll sign my name to it." The DA frowned. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Mr. Turner is affiliated with a motorcycle family," Jack said too quickly, and then softer. "A club that feeds my town's pantry and sits ICU vigils that newspapers don't print." He made himself breathe. "We'll be accountable in your language. Weekly reports, random tests, whatever your office needs to feel safe." The judge rubbed his temples like the day had been longer than its hours. He looked at Micah, then at the orange jumpsuit, as if it were a prophecy he wanted to interrupt. He looked back at Jack, at the scar on his forearm that peeked from a sleeve, at the quiet way the men in the back row took up space without asking permission from anyone but their own code. Finally, he nodded once. "Conditional release, 90 days, employment or training required. Curfew 9 p.m. Mr. Turner, you will submit weekly updates. Mr. Ramirez, you will not waste this." The gavel didn't slam, it sighed. Micah turned toward Jack, eyes flooded and furious with relief. The bailiff uncuffed him, like a man trying not to show he was moved. Torque exhaled a sound that was almost a laugh, almost a prayer. Wolf's chin dipped one notch. Lily squeezed River's hand hard enough to sting and didn't apologize. In the hallway, Micah stopped in front of Jack like a dog that isn't sure it's allowed to lean. Jack stuck out his hand. The boy grabbed it like a rope. "You'll live with Ray for a bit," Jack said. Ray being a retired club brother whose rules made boot camp look like summer. "Day shifts at the depot if you can keep up. GED at night, 2 meetings a week. If you miss one, I come get you." "I won't miss." Micah said too fast the way kids promise, because they need to believe it before they can do it. "You'll want to," Jack said. "That's when you call me. Before you decide. Not after." Micah nodded. "Okay." A beat. "Thank you." Jack clapped his shoulder once. "Don't thank me. Pay it forward. Cheaper interest." Torque snorted. "He's trying to be charming. It's new." "Shut up," Jack said, and the boy smiled for real small and sharp like sunlight through fence slats. They walked out into noon. The clouds had thinned to gauze. Mercy waited at the curb like a dog that knew its owner's gait. Jack felt the coin in his pocket again, warm now from the body that carried it. Wolf fell in beside him without ceremony. "You spoke plain," he said. "Judges smell agendas." "I had one," Jack answered. "Save the kid." Wolf's mouth twitched. Agenda approved. Torque slung an arm around Micah. Depot first. You'll learn to love bleach. Is that a gang thing? Micah asked deadpan. It's a rent thing, Jack said. Which is a life thing. They broke them the way tides break purpose, taking each body where it could do the most good. Jack watched them go, then turned toward the warehouse because work wasn't done, because work is never done. Inside the long table waited Scuffed and Faithful. Hawk sat 2 chairs down from the head tonight, not at the head, which told Jack more than any speech could. The room quieted as quick as a switch. Hawk let the silence bloom until it could hold weight. Then, we used to choose officers by saber rattling, a few grins. We're older now, smarter maybe, or tired. He looked at Wolf, then at Jack. Road captain needs to be a man who sees around corners and knows where to put the quiet. Wolf lifted his chin at Jack. It's you. The circle didn't clap. Hands don't clap when they're busy working. But backs straightened, eyes lifted. Torque gave a low whistle and then pretended he hadn't. River allowed in for the first 5 minutes. If he kept his mouth shut, he did not bounce in place and then froze at Lily's elbow when she squeezed his sleeve. Hawk slid a small patch across the steel, a rocker that would sit beneath Jack's main colors. Not a crown. A compass. You don't say yes because you're ready, Hawk murmured. Voice meant for 2 people. And God, you say yes because the road needs someone to point. Jack's throat tightened. He could feel every mile he'd walked in his boots, every night he'd mopped a floor, every time he'd failed and had to wake up anyway. He put his palm on the patch. He nodded. All right, he said. I'll point. Wolf's hand landed on Jack's shoulder. Torque's followed a beat later. Then more, one after the other, a slow, steady gravity, until Jack was a post in a fence that wouldn't blow down in a small storm. Hawk leaned back, eyes a little glossy. Church, he said softly, and the work flowed like water, finding its level. After Jack walked outside into a sky the color of a promise you're not ready to say out loud. Mercy ticked as she cooled. Hawk caught up at the ramp, moving careful on the bad leg. He didn't waste breath on speeches now either. He simply stood beside Jack and looked where Jack looked out over 5th Street across the old brick and new neon toward the ridge where a fire had cracked their lives into before and after. I heard about the kid, Hawk said. Good work. Jury's out, Jack answered. The verdict will be how he spends Tuesday nights when he's angry. Hawk's mouth curved. You're getting annoyingly wise. Occupational hazard, Jack said. They stood until the streetlights came on. Someone in the neighborhood burned dinner and swore in Spanish out an open window. A train shouldered the town with sound. Soon Hawk said, so quiet the night could have kept it, I'll ask you to take more. Not because I'm done, because you're ready. And because the work needs 2 men's backs. Jack nodded. He didn't look away from the ridge because if he did, he might look at Hawk with all the gratitude that scared him. When you ask, he said, I'll say yes, Good Hawk replied. Practice. He nudged Jack with his elbow, almost playful. Start by going home and sleeping before midnight. Jack snorted. Unrealistic. Lead anyway, Hawk said. At the duplex, Lily and River had draped a sheet between 2 chairs and called it a fort. The living room glowed with lamplight and the smell of buttered noodles. Micah sat on the floor with a workbook open pencil moving like he hated it and needed it at once. He looked up when Jack came in, eyes briefly asking, Still here? Jack nodded back, still here. Lily handed him a bowl. Report kids out, he said, jerking his chin toward Micah. Judge gave him a leash. We're the knot. River popped his head out of the fort. What's a leash? Something you don't need, Lily said, dragging him back with a laugh. Jack leaned against the counter, watching the whole small universe move, boys scribbling toward a future girl, bossing the evening into order. Found kid building a castle out of blankets. Mercy's keys on the hook, Hawk's coin beside the silver angel wing, like 2 moons in orbit. He felt the day finally catch up to him. In his pocket, the new rocker patch warmed to his palm, not heavy, clear. He looked toward the hallway. The framed prospect vest held its spot-cracked leather under glass, the word that had started the road prospect. It didn't look less. It looked first. Jack set the bowl down and wrote 3 lines in the notebook before he forgot the shape of them. Micah curfew check. Wed. 9:00 p.m. Call pantry. Re-freezer. Install date. Torque shadow 2 runs. Praise in public, adjust in private. Then a fourth line that had nothing to do with logistics. Thank the man you used to be. He got you here. He closed the book, turned out the kitchen light, and stood a quiet second longer than he needed. Tomorrow would bring more names, more lists, more fires that weren't flames. Maybe a real one, too. The road didn't promise clean days. It promised miles. Jack Turner touched the patch where the new rocker would sit. He didn't need fireworks. He had the steady hum of an engine and the small faces that looked calmer when he walked into rooms. He had a yes in his pocket and a town to keep warm, and the night kind for once let him sleep. The morning sun sliced through the blinds like justice casting stripes across the living room carpet. Jack sat at the edge of the couch, boots off socks, stretched thin notebook open. Every page had a purpose. Every line, a checkpoint in a life rebuilt from fire sweat. And the kind of loyalty most people only read about in novels or headlines. He tapped the pen against his lip, listening to the rhythm of the house waking. Lily's soft hum drifted from the kitchen. River's sneakers scuffing against the floor as he chased an imaginary opponent, and Micah's pencil scratched with determination, desperate to make the rules bend to his will. It was quiet, but the silence carried the weight of yesterday's choices, the gavel, the coin, the patch, and the responsibility that came with them. Hawk had called last night, his voice low and steady, the kind of voice that reminded Jack that even victories needed guards. "Keep your eyes open," Hawk had said. "You don't earn family by accident. You earn it every day." Jack stared out the window at 5th Street, the city stretching in muted hues, a living map of what he had saved, what he had changed, and what could still go wrong. He didn't flinch. The fire he had run into the Hells Angels' son, dangling in peril, the boy now safe and accountable. Those memories pulsed behind his ribs like a second heartbeat, each one a reminder that he was no longer a bystander. He was a linchpin. Mercy jingled as she stepped inside, carrying yesterday's leftover bread and a new sense of quiet triumph. "Breakfast?" she said softly, placing the plate on the table. She caught his gaze. "He's doing good, isn't he?" Jack nodded, tracing a finger along the notebook's margin. "Better than good. He's alive, learning, growing, not just surviving." River bounded up to the table, nearly colliding with Micah's elbow. "Did you see I built a fort that's bigger than last time?" He puffed his chest proud as if he had single-handedly conquered a kingdom. Lily smiled, tugging him gently back into the room. "It's a strong fort," she said, "but even kings need guidance, someone to show them the way." Jack's eyes met Micah's, and for a fleeting second he saw the fire that had once trapped the boy reflected in those hazel eyes. Not destruction, but potential raw and unpolished. "You're going to need rules," Jack said, voice calm but firm. "They're not chains, they're scaffolding. You climb on them, don't get caught falling." Micah nodded so hard his pencil skipped across the page. I understand. I'll follow them." His voice carried both desperation and a fledgling pride, like he was grasping at adulthood before it had fully been handed to him. The day moved like a careful tide. Jack checked off lists, called Ray about the depot schedule confirmed with Torque, about tonight's ride, and watched as Micah applied himself to lessons in accountability, strategy, and even kindness. Small victories stacked into ladders, each rung rising above the last, building a path out of chaos. By afternoon, the group was ready for another meeting at the warehouse. Jack led the convoy, Wolf on his left, Torque behind Mercy riding shotgun. The engines sang a low hymn of power and solidarity. Even the air seemed to bend toward them, waiting for something that was no longer purely chance, but earned trust. At the warehouse, Hawk stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his presence as imposing as ever. The room smelled of grease leather and the faint aroma of fried coffee from the pot simmering in the corner. The men gathered silently, understanding the unspoken rules. This was sacred ground, a crucible where strength met intention. Jack Hawk said, voice cutting through the hum of conversation, "You've proven more than we expected. But leadership isn't given once. It's claimed daily. Are you ready for the next level?" Jack's jaw tightened. I am, he replied, words carrying the weight of every mile he had ridden, every life he had touched, and every fire he had faced. The meeting stretched into strategy sessions, mentorship planning, and town initiatives. Micah listened, absorbed learning from conversations that once would have gone over his head. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was part of a legacy. Something larger than himself, protected by men who had chosen to guide rather than punish. By nightfall, the warehouse was quiet again. The engines parked like sentinels outside. Jack leaned against the wall, watching Micah work on his bike, torque cleaning tools. Wolf making notes. Lily and River packing up. There was a rhythm to this life, a cadence of accountability, protection, and opportunity. It was a life born from fire, literally and metaphorically, a life shaped by choices that could have gone differently, but didn't. Jack felt the coin in his pocket warm against his hand, a small constant reminder of yesterday's heroism and today's responsibilities. Hawk's patch sat on his chest, not just a symbol of rank, but a marker of trust and commitment. He breathed in the smell of oil, sweat, and coffee, savoring the texture of a world he had fought for, a family he had gained, and a future still unfolding. Tomorrow, Jack murmured more to himself than anyone else. We do it again. Better. Smarter. Together. He glanced at Micah one last time before stepping outside into the chill night, the city lights flickering like promises. Each one a reminder life could ignite in a second, and it could be saved in the next. And Jack Turner, once, a man running into flames without a plan, now led with intention, foresight, and a family bound not just by blood or oath, but by the unwavering force of loyalty and courage. The road ahead would demand everything, but Jack didn't flinch. He had a yes in his heart, a patch on his chest, and a boy to guide. And that was enough to keep the engines humming, the fires at bay, and the family, this unexpected, fierce, loyal family, alive. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.